Hey everybody, how's it going today? Well, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the furry fandom, and I know that there's a situation that you guys really want me to cover. I think it's still developing a little bit. I'm going to give it one more week. I'm still piecing together a few things, but most importantly, I've been very pleasantly surprised. Despite the horrific thing that's going on, I am pleasantly surprised about how there are other furry YouTubers out there who are covering this, who are taking this sort of situation very seriously and are doing their due diligence to cover it. I will allow that particular story because it's still developing as we're talking about this thing. But I'm gonna take a reprieve from the fandom for a moment because I think there's something more important to talk about, and I have done a topic similar to this earlier on this channel. But it's kind of funny in a way because it's like it has to do with the Supreme Court Justice nomination situation. So if that's not your thing, feel free to leave. But to me, it's actually less depressing than the fandom news. So I'm avoiding it. And the best way to avoiding it is to solve a problem somewhere else. And so I'm looking outside the fandom to solve a problem that seems to be a thing. And so that's what I do to cope with situations that are weird. So that being said, I also plan on writing an article on Flera about that particular situation that you're waiting for, and I'll probably publish that first there, then because it's one that I want to get right, so I want to write it up first before I cover that. But anyways, that aside, for those of you who this is probably a video that will be of interest to some people, particularly on procedures in government and things like that, because some things are amiss here when it comes to nominating Supreme Court justices to the to the bench, as it were. And I think a lot of Americans can see that. They just don't know how to solve the issue because they just because they're not educated people who deal with politics all the time. In fact, they're educated, but they deal with other things in their lives, and they deal with other wheelhouses, and they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're individuals who see things and processes, but they don't think about them in a critical way from an outsider's perspective, utilizing different tools and essences that have been developed by other countries and other individuals and other YouTubers. So they don't delve into like systems and how they work. So for those people, strap yourselves in because we're going to fix this broken system today. Let's do it today. Why not? So how is the system broken? Well, an individual called Kavanaugh was recently put forward to be put out on the Supreme Court Justice. Currently, they're stalling the vote for him for about a week because of allegations that came up during the process. Allegations that, of course, people who want him in there are really upset about and have kind of full-throatedly gone whole beast mode on the other side of the aisle because they really want this guy in there. But why do they want this guy in there so bad if there's questions about him? And why is it that this process is tainted? Well, we're going to go over that today. And it mostly made me think of a quote that occurred during the nomination process. And this is kind of what spurred this idea for me, was Lindsey Graham's little rant rave speech on this particular situation. Do you consider this a job interview? Would you consider this a normal job interview process? Would you say you've been through hell, sir? You've been through hell. So basically the context of this thing, and I'll put a link to the video of the actual situation at the Congress up there for you to see, was Graham was asking Kavanaugh if this was like any normal job interview process that he's ever seen. And Kavanaugh is like, he at first tries to play it coy, like, this is sort of like a job interview process. Yeah, no, man, this is not a job interview process. This is hell. You know what I mean? So unfortunately, Kavanaugh not playing along at first kind of made it seem like it was sort of staged, but the actors didn't really tell each other what their lines were. But eventually, Kavanaugh did come around to it because, what Graham is saying, well, you guys hid information, you Democrats hid information from us that, to smear this guy, to leave that bench open until you guys can wait until the election of things. So that's a lot of information to digest for the common American, because it's interesting to me because he goes, well, this isn't like a normal job interview process. And for most Americans, no, it's not. And even under normal circumstances, the Supreme Court justice nomination process and putting a Supreme Court justice on the bench is not like a normal job interview process. It is not similar in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's the reason why people are scratching their heads as to why this is such a big deal. If this guy has character questions coming up in his evaluation, why not pick the next guy, right? Like, why not? In a normal job interview process, that's what you do, right? Normal job interview process, you're like, well, you have a hiring manager, a manager of a particular department who's allowed to hire a person for a position. They bring in qualified candidates, do like a half-hour interview with them. They take their resumes, narrow down the resumes, then pick a subset of those resumes to bring in to talk to, right? And when they do that, they, will, talk to them, see if they're qualified or not, and then ask them to leave. If any time during that process, like a fellow employee comes up to the hiring manager and goes, a solid employee that's been there for years, has good content of character, does their job and does it well, comes up to the hiring manager after they're interviewing someone and goes, You're not looking to hire that guy, are you? Oh yeah. He seemed like a pretty. His resume sort of checked out. Why? What are you asking? Just so you know, like my sister had an issue with that guy. He got a little grabby at a party one time, and like he's kind of rumored to be kind of, a little not savory, and if you hire him, I'm gonna really question like the company here, and I'm like, I'm not gonna be able to work with that guy. And the hiring manager will take that into consideration, and if he goes, yeah, that's far out of bounds for this company, he can look at the two other guys, right? He can look at the two other candidates that he interviewed for, and just ignore the one that he did. No muss, no fuss, no drama. And the guy who's not hired doesn't realize why he wasn't hired. He just, knows he wasn't hired. No muss, no fuss, no drama. Because of the way that the system and how this one works, all right, because of how this one works, and it's not like a normal job interview process, it creates a situation of contention. And there are two ways to resolve the situations of contention. One I covered in a previous video talking about Supreme Court justices when the last one was nominated, and talking about how we should limit it for one bench nomination per president per term, and how that would work using a computer program by Nikki Case. This one we won't need to delve too much into it. We just need to know what the problem is, how it caused the problem, and how to solve the problem. So let's go over what the problem is. So let's look at this graph here. This is basically the nomination process in a nutshell. We have the president gets his short list and picks one candidate. Only one candidate. And he picks that one candidate and he forwards that candidate to the Congress, or basically a judicial committee that'll, elect to hire him, yes or no. So if it's an even number, the vice president is basically the tie-breaking vote. So this happens, and the committee says no. The president goes back and picks another candidate from his list. If they say yes, then he's confirmed to the Supreme Court justice. The issue is that this process takes a bit of time, probably about 1.5 months, maybe. It takes a bit of time. So there are three parts here. There's the president, there's the Congress, and then, that's the two parts, right? Once the Congress says yes, we're all good. So those two parts are not static. Those two parts change over time, right? So you have the president can change if people elect a new president. The Congress can change if people change the body of Congress through their votes. So right now, the Republicans are on a clock because as soon as November 2018 rolls around, there could be less Republicans on the committee, so the president won't be able to pick somebody who's as right-wing as he is. So basically, they're on what is called a clock. So there's going to create a bit of tension there because if Kavanaugh doesn't go through, they have to restart the process all over again. And if that process takes over a month, which it could, then the elections for this year could already be over, and the odds of him getting a more conservative-leaning or right-wing-leaning judge are going to be low. That's why that's why in the subcontext when, this guy is yelling his heart out, to protect Kavanaugh, some people see him as being genuine and emotional, and other people seeing him being crocodile tears, because particularly people on the left, because the people on the left know that, he wants that seat. He wants to put this guy in that seat. And even during this whole rant and rave, he yelled about the people on the left wing saying that they want to leave that seat open. And there are people on the left who have said that, sure. So that's just sort of underlines why this process is a bit broken. If people have dubious things, they can hold back information that will slow down or speed up the process depending on how fast they want to get it done, or if they want to delay it until one of these factors will change. In other words, partisans will play partisan games in order to try and slow down or speed up the process depending on if they want things to change and things are looking to change in their favor. In this case, the left is seen as wanting to slow the process down because the Congress could change in a few months, whereas the Republicans want to speed it up for that very same reason. So, because of this process and how linear it is and how inefficient it is, it creates an artificial contention. And unfortunately, that artificial contention can lead us down a road where we have good men, or good people, I should say, good folks, supporting a candidate who is actually really questionable, right? Whose character is actually extremely questioned, and could lead to somebody being a very uncharacteristic person being on the bench simply to expedite the process because of their fear that they won't be able to get a person that they really want on the bench, and they'll have to compromise more. In other words, they'll have to do their jobs if they have to do that. So that creates an artificial contention. But here's the thing, this process here is what I call a meta law. It is a process that's held because of tradition. But there's very important things to understand here. The Constitution allows the president to pick the Supreme Court justice and for this thing to happen. The president and the Congress having to work together to fill the Supreme Court bench is in the Constitution. And that's something that could change, but it's something that's very not easy to change. But to me, that's not the broken part, because that it requires two branches to fill the third branch. That is fine. That's actually a good idea. The problem is the method. The problem is, as Graham said, this is not like any normal hiring process that I've ever seen, right? So the question is, how do we make the current process like an actual corporate hiring process, where if a candidate ends up being Grabby McGrabby face, that you can just kind of work around them and pick other candidates that are also well qualified, that are also vying for that particular position. Because it's kind of funny if you think about it. This is a hell of their own creation. They can call it hell all they want, but the realization is that because they didn't use their power in order to create a better process, it's kind of on them that the process is the way it is and that people are gaming the process the way they are. It's sort of like a computer system. If you leave a system the way it is for too long, people with nefarious intent will figure out how to game the system or create viruses in which they will co-opt and coerce the system in order to play partisan games, right? So what you do is you put patches in. Basically, the Constitution understood this, and that's why there's something called amendments, right? Amendments are merely patches that the government puts in order to change things slightly so that they can do things better and more efficiently. And to me, this process needs amendment. So I'm going to do that for you today. It's actually not very difficult. So what do we want? Well, we want a situation that's more efficient, gets better justices in there, and runs more smoothly, right? It's fast. It follows the spirit of the process, and it also, keeps things flowing the way they should be, and keeps it so that benches are filled efficiently and effectively, right? With candidates that the president still has very much control over, but in a way in which it's not as contentious when it gets down to the brass tacks and when little things are found, and a little less gamification on the Republicans, Republicans hiding information that might make the Democrats delay the process, or question that this guy's a good character, so they'll hide information from him, and Democrats hiding information that they know they can use to stall the process if it goes through. Both sides did this, by the way. Both sides played the game with this process. Cory Booker noted that Republicans held information back from the Democrats in order to try and accelerate the process, while the Republicans are stating that the Democrats held back these abuse accusations because it slowed down the process, to try and slow the process down. So both agree that this process is being gamed. So how do we change the process so it's less likely to be gamed? It's quite simple, and it utilizes something called the alternative vote as well, which we'll go over a little bit, but I won't go into too much depth. I'll highlight a video when we get to that. All right, so here's the new process. Just a few more steps, but it's actually not too difficult to follow. So the president, instead of picking one person out of that short list that they decided to pick, would instead decide to pick multiple candidates. I'm going to go with 3, because 3 is a nice, healthy number. So I'm going to move this guy down a little bit. There we go. So basically, the president would pick 3 guys instead of just the one guy, right? So those 3 guys would all be forwarded to the committee. The committee wouldn't spend as much time analyzing each candidate as they do. They can narrow it down a little bit because they have more options. They're more free to kind of pick and choose between candidates this time. So they don't need as much time looking over an individual with a fine-tooth comb and asking for FBI investigations. They can instead kind of hope that, that the process goes more smoothly. And statistically it would. Because there's, people with dark histories are not as common as a lot of people think they are. They can come up, though. So this also kind of circumvents that whole thing. So the 3 candidates are presented to the Congress. The Congress hears out their positions on law. Imagine that, hearing out positions on law at a Supreme Court hearing. What is this old school thought? But not about how much beer you drink and stuff like that. No. Just call me old-fashioned, I guess. So you would have those 3 people talk about what their positions on law is, what they feel constitutional, unconstitutional, how they feel what the rule of law is, and how it applies to things, and things like that. They would present their positions. If there was controversies about the individual, those things would probably come up too. Just like they did with Kavanaugh. If Kavanaugh were like one of 3 candidates, those issues with him would still come up, right? So what would happen is that the Congress would hear that out. They would then vote, but they wouldn't vote with a simple yes or no binary option. What they would do is they would number the candidates that they just heard, all 3 of them, or more of them, depending on, like, the number's not a static number, but I'm going to use 3 as the example. Like, they're going to number it 1 to 3. So they're like, I like Joe the best, I like Sally the second, and I like Kavanaugh the third. Let's say Kavanaugh was running and he was still grabbing McGrab hands. So, like, they would vote, like, a Republican would probably go, well, I'm going to vote for Kavanaugh the second, like, my second choice. But my first choice is this Republican guy that, doesn't have as much baggage. Because the president's still picking the candidates, so you'd probably, if it were under Trump, it would probably be a high conservative person, a moderate conservative person, and a centralist maybe. Like, he would have like a variant people who would have various different things, but they would probably all be right-wing in some way, shape, or form. So, Democrats would obviously pick the less extreme of that, the people who they feel is the least extreme of that particular group set. And so that would happen, and so they would number it 1, 2, and 3. So candidate 1, number 2, and number 3. So what would happen is all the votes would be tallied up, but they would only pay attention to number 1. So they would tally up the number 1 votes, and then basically they would use an alternative style vote system. Okay, so now I'm going to link you to a CP Gray video to talk about how this alternative vote system works. Typically they're talking about people voting in candidates, but this is working for this thing too. And it might be a good way to introduce the alternative voting system to the American democracy, is to allow it to alleviate the pressures within the government itself. And then the government goes, you know what, this is a good idea. Maybe we should take this idea and push it out to the people and allow them to also feel the alleviation of tension brought on by these old processes, and allow them to also be relieved of some tension in their own lives in picking candidates, and making sure the most qualified individual without any baggage is put in there, right? Because they can vote who they really want to vote for without worrying about wasting their votes via the spoiler effect. More of that in that video. So when we're talking about this, so all the ones would get tallied. And let's say, so once all the ones get tallied, what will happen is all the number 3s will get eliminated. The person who gets the least votes of 1 gets eliminated. And the people who voted 1 for that person would have their votes moved to their second choice. And their second choice would become their number 1 choice. And then you would once again count up all the ones. All the ones that were not the third candidate stay the same, but the ones who voted for the third candidate who was eliminated. Basically, it's sort of Apprentice style. If we're going to use a turn of phrase. Basically, like the people are nominating, and they pick these guys, and the one with the least amount of 1 votes gets eliminated from the first episode. Then the second episode comes in, where the 2 that are left, have their number 1 tallies updated. Basically, if they were the second pick of the guy who was eliminated, they become the first pick. And then whoever wins that one gets the Supreme Court nomination and becomes the next Supreme Court justice. Basically, it is a lot like The Apprentice in a way. And I think if you're trying to sell a solution like that to this particular president, I think using The Apprentice as a sort of example as to how the style of voting works is actually a very, very effective tool of selling it to him. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Play to the things he knows, right? He knows elimination style things. He knows how it works. He knows how people enjoy that kind of style of things, instead of having one person and then having that person accepted or rejected and having to restart an arbitrary and annoying process all over again and putting all that work and wasting all that time. No. You get some good justices in there. You have them have at each other, or you have them promote themselves and try to show why they're the best justice for the job. And the people who are hiring decide who to hire. like a normal job interview process. But anyways, that's sort of just the general gist of the idea. Um, it's basically how it is. As I said, if you want to sell it to them, say it's Apprentice style. You eliminate the one who's least popular, or the one who is seen as the least effective. You are the weakest link. Goodbye, and then have them go through. And that way, basically, if something weird comes up during this whole process, the process keeps going. If one of the candidates is seen as a grabby McGrabby paws, like, dude, get those paws down. Jeez. It's like if that comes up about one of the candidates, the Republican, don't have to get all angry and going, you just want to stall the process. It's like, no, because the process keeps going. It keeps going. It doesn't care about Grabby McGrab paws. Grabby McGrab paws is still up for vote, and people can pick him as number 3 or number 2. And if the Republicans are worried that, the left people are going to vote, like the people who are reasonable are going to vote against Grabby McGrabby paws, even though he's more, ingrained in their party politic, they could choose a little less ingrained, but a little less baggage, right? They can go, well, I'm not going to give Kavanaugh my number 1 vote. I'm going to give it to this person instead. And then Kavanaugh would eventually be eliminated to the other 2. Because no one on the left would have voted for him. And people on the right would have been like, he's got some baggage. So he's not going to be my number 1 vote. He's going to be like my number 2. But it probably would never get that far because, like, basically anyone who voted, if Kavanaugh was like the number 3 or like the third worst candidate, which would probably happen in a situation like that, like Kavanaugh's votes would go to the people who voted for Kavanaugh, and their second pick would probably be like someone who's more conservative anyway, and where it goes from there, who knows? Probably the second candidate who's most conservative would win in a particular situation like this, but obviously politics is politics. You never know. And like in general, I think it would be a better solution. So what do you think? You could tell that I'm kind of avoiding a particular thing. I'm supposed to be talking about furry news. What am I doing? Why is this less controversial to me? Anyways, we'll probably go over that next week for more furry-ish news. So if for any of you furries who stuck around for this one, thank you very much. For any of you who are more politically leaning and kind of being weird as to why a kangaroo guy in a suit is telling you how to do things and questioning particular governmental systems, I've always been the kind of person to believe that sometimes, you don't need a title to do better things for people in your life. Like you don't need a fancy title like senator or congressman or president or anything like that to take a look at systems and how they work and try to improve it for everybody, and not just like one party or another party or anything like that. And the problem is as soon as you're in that game, as soon as you're in that headspace that a lot of politicians get into, as soon as you start getting into the game, you start seeing the game for what it is and not for what it should be. You don't start questioning as to why it's programmed the way it is or why it is the way it is. So for me, it's more enjoyable to kind of look at the systems from a distance and to analyze them and to, do that kind of a thing rather than to join that system and then become enamored in it. Because this happens a lot in any circumstance where you become so used to a system that you don't question other people questioning it or their viewpoints on things. And so I think that I kind of am, it's like as much as a lot of people say, tell me, it's like, maybe you should get into politics. It's like, I think that it's a lot better if I just keep looking at it from a distance and providing solutions. And if people pick them up, they pick them up. If they don't, they don't. Eventually, I think that we do have to pick up modernize some of these systems to be more efficient and more open and more democratic as in more like less like forcing ourselves against the wall. Because I think the biggest tragedy of this particular situation with Kavanaugh is a lot of people kind of like saw it as an attack on the system and that it made the system look bad, and the people who are in that system don't want it to look bad because they're part of that system, and they want to keep up appearances that, you know, the government's strong and the government can keep moving forward and make effective decisions without looking like it's got pie on its face and that the emperor wears no clothes. But if you continue to go down a system that is very unyielding and very unopen-ended and can lead to very contentious situations, then the system itself is what's leading to those contentious situations. And there are people that exasperate those contentious situations, but if they're able to do that, then you have to ask yourself how they're able to do it and how you can circumvent that gamification that people dislike so much. And the only way you can really do that is by expanding out the processes and making sure that, you know, people have more of a say on it and there's more flexibility, yet still follows the very foundations as to why the system works in the first place. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. If you like what you saw, click that like button. If you like more content like this, click the subscribe button and click the ding dong bell. I'm in Tantrum McNally. Thank you very much for watching. I'm gonna get the hop out of here. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. And I might be covering something I don't want to cover, but I'm gonna have to cover it. Anyways, thanks.